Good afternoon. Welcome to part 2 of Martin Healthcare Advisors and our Good to Great series on how to take your rehabilitation business from good to great. First of all, I'd like to do a little bit of a recap on what we talked about in our last segment. And the way we ended that segment was to say that the companies that we have analyzed and that we have worked with that we would consider great are those companies that do 3 things operationally. First, they set operational budgets and targets. Secondly, they share those budgets and targets with their staff. And third is they measure and respond to variance against those targets, not on an annual basis, not on a quarterly or a monthly basis, but on a weekly basis. And those are the companies that we find and that we have seen achieve operational excellence. So today I want to share with you how those companies achieve operational excellence. First and foremost, again, we talked about setting targets. And we believe that the way in which targets and budgets should be set for a rehabilitation business is what we would call bottom-up budgeting. What I mean by bottom-up budgeting is this. We start the increase or the change from the prior period or year from the referral or from the new patient, because that is the basic element of all rehabilitation businesses, is that referral, that new patient. And that's what we as therapists and we as therapy business owners understand. Many companies will base their budgets based on top-line budgeting. And they'll look at a percentage or an increase in sales volume, gross charges. And the problem with that is that, again, most physical therapists and most therapy business owners don't understand how to achieve a top-line sales target. And so therefore, again, bottom-up budgeting is the only thing that works when it comes to budgeting and targeting for a rehabilitation business. The other aspect of bottom-up budgeting is that we believe that budgets and targets should be set not only by owners, but also by directors and staff. And what I mean by bottom-up budgeting, in addition to starting from the referral and building up, is also that we want to build the budgets with our staff, with the rank and file staff treating and working with patients every day and get their involvement. That's the other point of bottom-up budgeting. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that a budget, an operational budget, must be set based on historical performance. And so the first thing we look at when we go and when we develop a budget for a client, or that you would develop when you would be setting your budgets, is you need to study very carefully your historical performance. So you look at what the business achieved in many of the different volume indicators the prior year, the year prior to that, on a 3-month trailing trend and on a 6-month trailing trend. We've actually developed a tool of setting and establishing operations budgets that will automatically show how your budget compares to 3-month trends, 6-month trends prior to your performance, and what kind of an increase it's going to actually require to get you to your budget on a monthly basis, an annual basis, as well as a weekly basis. The third key to operational excellence is that you must develop a tool that will not only measure your budgets on an annual basis, a quarterly basis, and a monthly basis, but would actually show in the key areas that we will define for you how you fared against the budget on a weekly basis. We find that is the only way to get you and your staff to respond to variances to that budget. And that's to look at it weekly. And that weekly needs to be the very week prior. And we advocate that you would be looking at the performance against the budget for last week on Monday and Tuesday of this week, because that way the operations and what happened in that week is still very fresh in your mind. And lastly is that We recommend tracking the following volume indicators in the business. First is referrals, new patients. So how many referrals did we achieve? Second would be visits. How many visits were achieved? Third would be units, or what we consider units of service. Charges, or how much we charged. And then cash collections, how much cash was collected over a period of time. Those are the main volume indicators. Now, in addition to the volume indicators, it's absolutely imperative that we also take a step further and look at some of the metrics that are created by those volume indicators. And we believe that the true metrics, the most important metrics, and we've coined them as the Martin metrics, that the most important metrics to guide a physical therapy or a rehabilitation business to success and to operational success, as well as profitability, are the following. First and foremost is, what was your charge per visit? What were your units of service per visit? What was the cash per visit? And how many visits per referral? Commonly known in the hospital language as length of stay. So for every new patient, what were the average number of visits that were achieved for each of those new patients or referrals? And then the productivity measurement that we have developed is looking at visits per FTE per day. And we look at each FTE and have come up with a way in which to evaluate FTE based on, first and foremost, the FTE status. So whether a person is 40 hours a week, 20 hours per week, or 10 hours per week. And that's multiplied against a value indicator. For a therapist, we use 1. For a tech or an aide, we use a 0.3. For a manager, a treating manager who's treating the majority of his time, or about 80% of his time, we would use a 0.8. And once all those are added up, that gives us the true measure of productivity, which again, visits per FTE per day. And it's imperative that everyone in the clinic or in the practice or in the business is actually speaking that same language and understands how that calculation works. So again, as we just discussed, all of these operational elements, and by channeling these operational elements into one sheet of paper or one computer screen where you can look at that on a weekly basis with your staff, will achieve operational excellence. And by achieving operational excellence, you will be adding value to your business as well as profitability to your business. So in the next segment of our Good to Great series, we're going to provide you with information on how to elicit and demand feedback from your staff on the results of the budget against the actual. So again, it's important that we're establishing budgets and that we're looking at it on a weekly basis. But unless you can get your staff to act and to work together to elicit change, positive change in your operations, it merely becomes an exercise of looking at data. And we advocate that you should not be just looking at data, but using data to affect positive change in your business. I want to thank you for your time today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in our next segment. Thank you.